All right, so today we're going to be talking about two forms of two things. First one's going to be public opinion. The second one's going to be your political ideology. We're talking about public opinion first because we want to know how we actually form public opinion. So that's where we're going to start, is how we form public opinion. Public opinion is the aggregate of everything that you believe, with a few caveats. First of all, we only care about those people who are above the age of 18, because if you're below the age of 18, you can't vote. And second of all, we only really care about you if you vote. Your opinion really only matters to us if you actually get engaged in the political system. If you don't care enough to actually get engaged in the political system, why should the political system actually care about you? So what's the political history of the political polls? They started in Kansas with a poll that asked who is going to win the next presidential election. It was used to increase readership and for entertainment value because people would buy a newspaper the next day to find out what the results of the poll were. They were labeled straw polls. They really didn't tell us anything we could actually use to predict elections. They told us a lot about that locale, but they didn't tell us a lot about the nation. The modern polls actually began with George Gallup, who started off with a question that was actually a pretty good one. How much money could I make if I could tell newspapers who won the election the day after the national election? See, before this time, you could only tell who won in about January when the Electoral College dismissed. George Gallup figured if I could tell newspapers who won tomorrow, they'd be willing to pay me a lot of money for that. So he decided to apply a bit of math and statistics to see if he could actually get the answer. So this is the math behind what we're doing. In probability theory, the central limit theorem states that given certain conditions, the arithmetic mean of a sufficiently large number of hybrids of independent random variables, each with well-defined expected value and well-defined variance, will be approximately normally distributed regardless of the underlying distribution. That's a mouthful. What it really means is this: that if you take enough people and you take the average of their average opinion will be within 2 standard deviations of the population average. So how large is large enough? Well, you really need to ask 800 people. Less than 800 people, and it doesn't follow the central limit theorem. You don't have enough people for their average to match the national average. So what I would do with my high school students is I'd always have them try this. I would have them go out and ask everyone in the high school how tall they were. And I'd actually have them leave class to go do this. And I'd have them find out the average height of each person living in the United States. So they'd go and they would find the average height of everyone who lived in, for example, Ballinger, Texas, at the high school. And we would take those slips, they would bring them in, and we would stack the slips on a table, or I'd put marks on a board in order to find out how many people answered each one of the different heights. The average of their averages was usually always either 5'8" or really close to it. And the reason why is because we would ask enough people that would actually get close to the central limit theorem. So how do you make this process more accurate? Well, George figured a few tricks that helped out a lot. First trick, you have to ask people at random, from random locations in the district you want to know about. You can't ask people in a small location. Why not? Miami. Miami was an interesting event in the history of polling. In 2004, John Kerry ran against George W. Bush. The national polls predicted that John Kerry was going to win. Why? Because we thought he was going to win Miami-Dade County in a landslide. It turns out reality was much different. The election in Miami-Dade County was close, and it wasn't enough votes for Kerry to actually win Florida. So what happened? Well, there was a graduate student who was at the age of about 23. He was about to graduate, and he did not have a date the entire time he was in college. He was a political nerd, then he knew he needed to meet another political nerd to even have a chance of getting married. And so he would wait when he was supposed to be doing the exit interview, and instead of asking everyone who they voted for, he only asked girls between the age of 18 and 22. And after he was finished asking, he would ask for their phone number, because what better way to find a girl who's as big of a political junkie as you are? Years later, I found him, tracked him down, and I asked him if it was worth it. He told me yes, he got married to one of the girls. Of course, he was never allowed to work in political science ever again. But this tells us something. In Miami, in this election, we knew a lot about what 18 to 22-year-olds were going to do if they were women. But 18 to 22-year-old women don't vote the same way as the rest of the nation. And so since we didn't have a random sample, our sample was false. It was biased, and it was wrong. The second trick, you have to be very careful about who you ask and what you ask them. Why? Well, it's really easy to influence a person's response given your responses that you have that you show them. We call this priming. And an easy way to see this is through the hot-cold experiment. So I want you to listen to this Radio Lab on choice. There is one that is called Free Will. And at about 6:22, let me bring it up so you can actually see what this looks like. And at about 6:22 on their webpage, on free will, is free will really free? This is the page that I want you to actually look at. I want you to start at 6:22, and I want you to listen to that. And I want you to listen to what they say about priming. All right, so now that you've had a chance to listen to it, I want you to notice something. They could actually change the response that a person had on whether or not they thought a person in a picture was trustworthy based entirely on whether they were handed a hot cup of coffee or a cold soft drink. And this could be a problem for any responses that we have in a political opinion survey, because that means that the events that you go through in the course of that day can actually change your responses when we ask you the question. Why is that so bad? Well, how good will our predictions be if they represent a bias, whether it's a bias that happens in the media or if it's a bias that happens because I ask a question in a way that literally biases the way that you respond because you want to please me. For example, if I asked you, what do you think of President Trump? Versus, what do you think about President Trump? You might give me a different answer thinking that your grade was at stake. To combat this, surveyors actually have to be specifically trained not to prime respondents accidentally. It's very tricky. It takes a lot of training. All right, so we can make a prediction, but what else could cause it to go wrong? Remember, a sample has to be random, right? So if someone calls you on your phone and it says unlisted number, or if it says, for example, Gallup polls, what do? Well, if you're like most people, you hang up. This means that the people who actually respond to the poll aren't necessarily random, because we're only talking to people who aren't smart enough to hang up when they see unlisted number. And remember, if our sample is biased, then just like in Miami, our results are wrong. So how do we trust this? Well, let's say that we can trust this. What do we do with the information? Some people listen to it. People who listen to it we call delegates. Delegates are members of the House of Representatives and the Senate who actually listen to the things that we tell them and act on that. Some don't, though. We call these people trustees. Most people in Congress, though, perform a mix of these two options. They're delegates when you care about an issue, and they tend to be trustees when you don't really care. Okay, well, where does this opinion come from? Parents. They're the most important things that influence your public opinion because they raised you. Then actually comes peers, but they only become more important later on in life. Education also matters, but not nearly as much as parents and peers. Life experiences, what you've actually gone through, is another huge thing that affects your public opinion, as well as your gender, the media, and the government. But wait, aren't they supposed to be listening to us? Well, yes, but at the same time, they can also influence our opinions as well by what they talk about. All right, well, what about surveys from other parts of the world? Well, we also do a world values survey that helps us understand what other people believe and why they believe it. We also have a lot of other surveys about happiness because people like to be happy. Well, this is public opinion. This is our ideas about public opinion. Next video I'm going to post about for this module will actually be about your political ideology. Have a good day. I'll see you in that video.